Sometimes you don't get the choice of where to start preaching. And today is one of those days. Sometimes the scriptures make that choice for you. Paul is on top form. He's offering us words that are short and snappy. It's very much like the kind of ethical teaching we often hear Jesus himself speaking. It's punchy, it's challenging, it's idealistic. I can really get behind it. Love people, pray for them, be good to the poor. Good job, Paul, you're on a roll. Live peaceably, refrain from vengeance, actively care for your enemy's health, because, and then boom, out of nowhere, actively care for your enemy's health, because by doing that, you will heap burning coals on their head. You can kind of imagine the scene where Paul is giving these words to his scribe, and he's saying, don't seek for vengeance, feed your enemies, give them something to drink, because you'll heap burning coals on their head. And the scribe kind of looks up, and he's left a big smear on the scroll. And he says, could you just go over that last bit again, Paul? And Paul says, yeah, no problem yet. Don't seek after vengeance. No, I got that bit. Okay, if you see your enemy hungry, no, I got that bit. Feed them, give them something to drink. Just the really last bit. Oh, yeah. Doing that, you'll heap burning coals on their head. I thought that's what you said. That's what I mean, that sometimes the scriptures tell you where to start preaching. I could tell you about loving people, I could tell you about praying, about being good to the poor, but ticking away at the back of your mind would be, when's he going to talk to us about that bit where we have to pour burning coals on our enemies' heads? Let's dive right in then. It's helpful to know that Paul is quoting from Proverbs chapter 25, and quoting more or less word for word. This is what we read in Proverbs. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Maybe understanding a little of the context of that proverb might give us a clue as to what Paul's intentions might be in making use of it. Well, it comes in a whole section in Proverbs where we hear physical experiences used to describe emotional experiences. Right before it in the passage, we get the following. Like one who takes away a garment on a cold day, or one that pours vinegar on a wound, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. The idea is, don't try and cheer someone up when they're in mourning just by singing them a happy ditty, because that would be hypothetically like you were pouring vinegar onto a wound that they had. It's describing an emotional experience using a hypothetical physical experience. And in fact, we can see that Paul kind of has this whirring through his mind. He doesn't quote that one directly, but in verse 15 we hear him say, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Obviously that other proverb was ticking through his mind as he was writing this piece. If only that cleared everything up though, but it doesn't quite. The logic doesn't really seem to flow. On the one hand, we're told, don't sing a joyful song to someone in mourning because that would be like a nasty physical experience. But on the other hand, we seem to be told, do feed your enemies because that would also be like a nasty physical experience. It's fair to say that it's not really clear-cut. Here's another option. Maybe it's about comeuppance. Maybe it's about be kind to your enemies because in the end, you'll get them back. Or maybe even burning coals is meant to incite in our mind the idea of hellfire. Maybe it's meant to be kind to your enemies because that way you'll secure their eternal damnation. It seems unlikely. Paul opens this section saying, let love be genuine. Love doesn't seem awfully genuine if the reason that we're doing it is because we think that we're going to get something out of it at the end. And in just the previous verse, he tells us not to seek after vengeance. So I don't think so. For me, what works as the best interpretation is that by loving my enemy, by being generous and gracious towards them, I make them aware of their sinfulness and their wickedness towards me. I bring about that moment where they put their head in their hands and they say, "Oh my goodness, what have I done?" And actually, the kinder I am to them, the more faultless that I am, the more keenly felt, the more painful that moment is. But even though that's the case, that's no reason for me not to be loving. That's the interpretation that works for me, but I realise that I'm speaking that from an amazingly privileged position. Statistically speaking, we, from the time that these words were written until today, we are living in the very safest, the very most peaceable days the earth has ever known. We don't worry daily about our food and our drink. We rarely worry about having a roof over our heads. There's not a rival gang in Harlow who are seeking to raid Epping and to take away our lives. I'm speaking from an amazingly privileged position, and I really struggled through the week to try and think of who I would identify as my enemies. I'm a bit short on enemies. I thought maybe I would identify ISIS, who are persecuting religious and ethnic minorities, among them my Christian brothers and sisters. Maybe they're my enemy. But truth be told, I feel kind of more pitiful, really. I feel that whatever the disenfranchising and powerlessness and the terrible experiences that those people must have gone through in order to want to walk that path, I feel sad about that more than angry or hateful. I suppose I could say that Wonga are my enemies. They deliberately perpetuate poverty in order to line their pockets. But again, I feel kind of more opposed to the structural sin, the sin in our society that says that money is so sought after that it blinds people to the damage that they're doing. I come from a very privileged position. I can take the moral high ground, and I can be a living room and indeed also a pulpit idealist. If I had enemies, if I feared for my life, if I was constantly persecuted, if I faced injustice daily, then maybe the idea of pouring burning coals on my enemy's head would sound a little more attractive. I hope not, but I really don't know. It's not a situation into which I have any experience to speak. Someone who did know all about persecution, someone who could speak into that experience, was James Foley. Known to his family as Jim, he is the American reporter who was executed, beheaded by ISIS sometime in the last couple of weeks. He, along with his mother Diane and his father John, knew a lot about being patient in suffering, about persevering in prayer. James was never able to write a letter home to them. They were all intercepted. But what he did manage to do was to get one of his fellow captives, a Danish man called Daniel Rai Otterson, to memorize a letter. And when Daniel was released, he gave the letter to James's parents, and they published it online last week. And this is the second paragraph that James wrote. "I know you are thinking of me and praying for me, and I'm so thankful. I feel you all, especially when I pray. I pray for you to stay strong and to believe. I really feel I can touch you even in this darkness when I pray." An extraordinary message of hope and of perseverance. John Snow, the Channel 4 reporter, did an interview last week with John and Diane, and you can catch up on the Channel 4 website if you missed it. I offer you some of the words from that interview today because Those are people for whom this is not just a conceptual or a theoretical question like it is for me. These are people for whom it is real life. John, James's father, said, "Our faith tells us to try and love as much as we possibly can and forgive when we can." I'm not equipped to judge others, and nor do I want to. I just want Jim's death to have not been in vain, and his life to mean something, particularly in the way of helping others. That's what our God wants us to do. And Diane, his wife, continued, "We believe in a very merciful, compassionate, loving God." And Jim did. And the more suffering Jim saw, the larger his heart seemed to grow. We really didn't have any idea how many hearts he had touched all over the world. The outpouring of love and prayers throughout these years has been our support. The prayers for Jim around the world gave him an incredible strength, but not only strength, also a deep love in the midst of much cruelty. Snow continued by asking them about forgiveness, and they responded, "We need to know that hatred grows out of pain, out of poverty, and one life at a time can be changed by a compassion for that. Obviously, we have to stop this hate. Compassion and forgiveness does not mean that we allow it to continue, but instead we try to diminish it by loving compassion." Those, for me, are words of a woman who's really understood what Paul's trying to get at. Those, for me, are the words of a woman who's understood what it is to feed your enemies when they're hungry and give them something to drink when they're thirsty. It's not pacifism in the sense of being passive. It's active rebellion. It's not a question of trying to suck up or placate your enemy. It's purposeful. It reclaims power. It lifts up the lowly. As Christians, we're not told to poison our enemies' drinks. That would be active and hostile. We're not told to refrain from telling our enemies where they can get water. That would be passive and hostile. But we're told to be active and generous. Give them a drink. It's not pandering. It's not an attempt to prevent some future harm to us. Rather, it's the amazing assertion that we're not willing to be complicit in the evil that they're part of. It's the assertion that we have no regard for their behaviour. Diane, James's mother, concluded the interview like this. After his capture, one of the first pieces of news that we received that James was still even alive came from a young Belgian jihadist who, once he had changed his mind and returned to Belgium, called us to tell us that Jim was alive. Jim changed his heart, and that's the kind of challenge his life gives us. Amen.